right, so. All right, well, I'm here with Spencer, who's been doing a series on radical liberalism, and I've been listening to it, and I've been taking mental notes along the way, trying to think about where we agree and kind of what I'm getting out of it. And I just wanted to read you some of my notes, Spencer, and you stop me if there's something that you think I've gotten wrong or something where maybe there's some more nuance or that you disagree with. So the first point I've got is that inequalities and environmental problems are caused by economic systems, such as state capitalism and state socialism. In other words, they're systemic. And that this is, those two problems are kind of paramount in your mind: human inequality and environmental problems, right?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So far, so good. All right. And so second point is US progressives are not really as radical as they think because they want to fix the effects, such as human inequality, intolerance, and sometimes environmental harm. They want to fix the effects and not the cause, which is economic. And the third point is that even serious leftists in the United States, or people who think that they're leftists, who read Sojourners if they're Christians, or something like Nation magazine, focus on helping people get into the liberal middle class as full participants via legal equality and recognition, rather than focusing on facilitating actual economic equality. I remember a while back interviewing Chris Cutrone, whose famous phrase is "the left is dead," right? And then he says "long live the left," but he's very critical because he feels like progressives have more or less given up on economic equality. So, I mean, is this, let me stop here and just ask you, like, do we agree that most people who call themselves left in the United States are this type of leftist who's just sort of interested in making sure that everybody, regardless of race, religion, nationality, gender, and sexual orientation, should be equally capitalists and equally recognized?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. And I think Cutrone usually phrases it by saying they're the left wing of capitalism, that they don't want actual socialism. Even if some of them do claim they want democratic socialism or whatever, they really just want a kind of woke capitalism.
Yeah, woke capitalism. So, I mean, that's what we mean by radical liberalism. It's liberal still. It's classically liberal. And, you know, much of what I've done for the past, I don't know how many years now it's been that I've been doing this channel, has been a critique of liberalism from both on the part of the left and the right as a category of political and economic thought. And I think that you see what Caitlin Curtis is up to is just another example of sort of left radical liberalism in the US. But we can talk about that more in a minute. So here's another thing that I wrote down. So could we call the radical liberal a kind of unconscious conservative because they're trying to perfect and maintain the existing system? Just yes. Yes. Okay, we agree. All right. And did you want to add anything else?
No, I mean, I could say that they wouldn't put it this way, that they have this sort of radical ethos that they are really against power as currently ordered. That's what they would say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really buy it, but that is their rhetoric a lot of the time. And it's certainly Caitlin Curtis's.
Yeah, it's really kind of edgy rhetoric, or at least it feels sort of self-consciously edgy. But at the same time, what they're saying and doing is actually just kind of, it's in no way like changing the actual system, as much as Curtis likes to talk about systems. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, okay. Well, I think we're in agreement there. Uh, their style of radical liberalism then leaves the overall liberal system intact and even working better than before, sometimes literally because their style of woke liberalism actually sells stuff, right?
Sure.
Um,
My only objection would be I think that makes them seem more effective than they actually are. That the primary thing these people do in American politics is provide fodder for right liberals to say, look how awful these communists are, and this is why we need to vote for Republicans.
mhm.
But they do both. You're right that the rebel cell or whatever they provide that too by creating more commodities and for people to consume.
Yes.
Yeah, they do that.
Yeah, a while back, I don't know, it was maybe a couple of years ago, I did a video where one of the things I featured was Angela Davis, sort of like selling her new fashion brand. She was depicted as wearing a t-shirt with a black power fist on it, and this was her new fashion line. And the image of Angela Davis, who's this really kind of old style, civil rights leader
Black Panther.
figure. Yeah, Black Panther, right. Like selling t-shirts seemed to me to be like the ultimate um, symbol of what I called at the time recuperation, just sort of like she'd given up on her radicalism really and had joined the way we do things, trying to change people's attitudes by symbolism and what we wear and making a buck in the meantime, selling t-shirts. Um, and so I see your treatment of Caitlin Curtis in that same light. And I know one of the slides you had was, at home in the gift shop, right? I mean, are we talking about the same phenomenon there between Angela Davis and Caitlin Curtis, or is there something else going on that makes what Curtis does worse or better, or what do you think?
I mean, we could compare and contrast them, but it seems to me at the most basic general level, no, they're basically the same.
Mm-hmm. Curtis is more Curtis. The one thing that I thought of was, well, Curtis is putting herself up to be a Christian at the same time. And I think that's partly why you zeroed in on her, right? I mean, is that gives me heartburn. Does it give you heartburn that
Yeah, I don't find it appealing to use a term I've gotten from the platypus people that what she's really doing is she's liquidating Christianity into her like modern indigenous worldview, which is
mm-hmm.
what it is. I'm not saying it's annoying, but there's like 100 things annoying about that book, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I can
There was
tell.
a reviewer I found somewhere that said she doesn't so much like synthesize Christianity and being Potawatomi so much as she just indigenizes Christianity by liquidating it of anything that makes Christianity unique and stern and austere and exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, I think a lot of, left-leaning Christians in the United States tend to kind of, I don't know, almost equate certain political and cultural positions with Christianity.
right. It's part of the culture war, and it's a lot
Yeah,
of the right
right,
generally.
right. Mm-hmm. And then what's lacking is the substance of the religion. The actual substance of the religion gets sort of like sucked up into the political, which is I mean, one of the themes that I've kind of tried to harp on is ideological possession. And I do feel like it's a subtle form. It's not a virulent form of that, but when people begin to equate whether it's their cultural identity or their economic philosophy or political positions with their religion, then it is a form of ideological possession, and it is not the same thing as the baseline religion. I mean, that sounds kind of harsh, but that's, I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true. I tend to think about it kind of in terms of like bottlenecking, is that you have this big base of the religion, but then what they only want to be expressed is their narrow neck that they like. Now the metaphor kind of breaks down, but both right liberals and left liberals do it. So in the one, Jesus just loves everybody no matter what, and we should all just be nice and have some vague commitment to a welfare state. And then the other side, no, Jesus, we have to work out our economic salvation with fear and trembling, and read the Bible. And we
Mhm.
don't need to worry about social justice.
Right, but we do need to worry about patriotism and other things like that.
And we need to
Yeah,
worry about
right.
sexual morality a whole lot. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a problem because when politics basically takes over your religion, then there's really no reason to be religious. I mean, this is partly why I think churches are losing people, is because, well, if you can go to your political party function, and get the same thing, then why go there?
Yeah. Why go there?
Yeah, it's a loss. So I've almost come to the end of my list here, and I just wanted to then have a conversation. But like the last thing on my list is basically a question: why bother? Why bother, in other words, to try as hard as we have to make this type of critique of liberalism? And what I came up with is that to try to help people who somewhat have the will to solve problems like inequality and climate change from frittering away their time on this stuff. I think what at least what angers me is that we so easily get sucked up into these modes where really we're brainy people too. I think that's the most frustrating thing. Brainy, productive people like the PMC, right? People who have like education and they've got financial resources and they're used to making things happen, but all of their energy of doing something good is sucked up into these, these crusades on Facebook and,
Sure.
speaking tours and stuff like that. I feel like both of us would like to sort of, and somewhat impolitely say, please stop that, like you're wasting your time. You're wasting our time.
Except I think from the standard of the average person, actually, this whole discussion between us is wasting our time, and that they're at least hustling and playing the
Right.
game.
Trying to
So
produce something.
something
Yeah.
that can be bought and sold and can add it to one more little flashpoint in the culture war.
Yep. But then you ask yourself, are things remarkably different now from, a few decades ago? And sadly, I can't say that. I mean, we have a lot of the same problems that they've been working on for decades.
Who's
Working
that?
on the PMC, especially the liberal class,
Hmm.
or the left, the U.S. progressives.
Sure.
Because we still have huge problems with racial prejudice. We have if we wanted to talk about the right wing liberals, we still have family breakdown. We have all sorts of licentiousness, blah blah blah. I mean, none of the problems that either side of the PMC or liberal class have really been solved at all after all of the talk and the posturing and the performative arguments.
But what's great for them is both sides can claim they never attained sufficient power to enforce their vision of how society should be.
Right. So they
And
can
so
always
they
blame.
can plausibly blame, yeah.
Isn't that great? Isn't that nice? That there's always a reason why they didn't succeed, that doesn't boil down to maybe they had the wrong strategy. Maybe instead of talking and, fighting, maybe doing something themselves would have been better. Mm.
But them doing something themselves would be to be fundamentally different people than they are.
Yeah, that's it's possible for people to change. It's just uncomfortable for people to change. And I think that, I mean, you're onto something that, the reason why this, I call it in class, a ping pong match that we've been in this like eternal ping pong match between the left and the right. And if Matt Christman is right, it's the beautiful boaters and the brunchers primarily, right? Like,
well, in terms of in
choosing,
America, these are the people invested in actually voting.
right, right.
And there can be some ping pong versus if you're rich, then your interests are going to be more or less enforced no matter what. And if you're poor, they won't be no matter what. So it's these people with a stake in the game and something to gain and something to lose that
Mhm.
expresses our politics at the national level. He argues, and I find it persuasive.
Right. I do too. Yeah. I think it makes people feel as though they've accomplished something while they've preserved their entire way of life, and they haven't really like changed anything that could possibly threaten their way of life. But they can go home and say, I spoke about this. I did something about it. I bought my, my groceries at this store.
Sure.
I wore this Black Power t-shirt, whatever it is,
Or I stood up to the hateful right wingers who live more or less the same kind of life I do, and I stood up to them. And if they had opened up their hearts and just fully believed what I said, then everything would be fixed.
Mhm. If
Because
they would, yes, if that's what both sides say, like we just need to somehow, they just need to agree with us.
sure, which is where I mean, throughout all this, like I can picture Chris Cutrone saying, "Yeah, it's because they've." I'm kind of extrapolating what I've heard him say, but it's something to the effect of, "Well, they've regressed to a medieval religious mentality." And that explains why they don't have politics where we're actually going to soberly assess the situation and figure out policies and how we can tactically convert people. That's not the point. The point is these people are heretics, and let's get let's grab the priest and let's sprinkle holy water and let's hear hortatory orations about how they need to be stopped and how we're so right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a little crude to put it that way, but like, to me, that's the only way you can make this kind of politics make sense, because it's not actually a way to win power in America.
No, it's a way to sort of exercise excess energy and, maybe some
And
guilt. Yeah, guilt.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, in one of the authors, who was it that talked about like virtue hoarding that you mentioned?
Catherine Liu. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like, let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, in a way we sort of have been, but that seems to be going on at every level of our society right now. With people who really ought to know better, just getting on. I mean, the social media dimension of this is just huge. I think social media really encourages this behavior of taking these pot shots and these sort of empty attacks on the character of the other side. Um, I mean, would you agree with me that social media like exacerbates this problem and brings it out in people? I know, Caitlin Curtis herself like tweets a lot.
Yeah.
You've looked at a
Almost
lot of
40
them. I haven't. Like, tell me
almost
about this.
49,000 tweets.
What? What?
49,000.
Well,
Almost.
how do you find out how many tweets somebody's done?
It's just right there at the top.
Oh my God, 40. Oh wow. So what are these tweets
That's
like?
because that's her activism.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. See, that's what I'm worried about.
During our book club, somebody commented that the book, they didn't know this, I assume, but they commented that the book it's written like a Twitter discourse.
Really?
So, yeah.
Oh,
So
like
maybe
those long form Twitters, like,
right. Yeah, but also that layer of argument where it's just we make a few assertions and then we move on.
Okay. Okay. So what's she tweeting about?
Like a lot of, I don't know, it's a blur. Uh, there's some indigenous protest happening in Detroit that she's really about. Tries to get people to sign up for her Substack a fair amount.
Mm.
She complains about cops killing people sometimes. There's a certain amount of just petty, like tweeting at Target about a cup that's really big. She holds it up to her face. That was one of them I found. She really likes Schitt's Creek meat gifts. She uses those a lot.
And I sort of barely know what Schitt's Creek is, but perhaps that's for the best. I don't know.
The one episode I was exposed to would indicate yes. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I mean, so if I don't know, like what I am on Twitter, but basically just to like roll out the latest video I do. I don't tweet a lot, but I mean to do 49,000 tweets, that's got to be taking up quite a bit of your day. And I when I wake up in the morning, I do see like the latest tweets of people. I understand how addictive this can be just because they're usually so dramatic, they kind of beckon you to open them up. But literally, if your activism is mainly tweeting, you've made an error. I mean, even let's, like, yes, tweeting is like the ultimate example, but even if I thought that going into my classroom and just telling people what I thought in my political opinion, which I sometimes do, but I try to control myself. But like, if I thought that that was activism, or that this was my, way of changing the world, I'd be making the same error. It's
Sure.
it's not just about changing people's minds. That's hard enough, but
Yeah, but I think this is a fundamental, like, basic liberal assumption, which is that we deal with the individual and who they are inside, divorced from community and divorced from material reality.
yeah, right. As if all we need to do is sort of re-educate, not to get too inflammatory, but like to just re-educate people.
Mhm.
And then if every individual was sort of in a different frame of mind, well, then the world would be a different place. And this is the old, Enlightenment dream that we still, it's just, we can't seem to expel this, right? Like it's what people thought in the 18th century when, we were coming up with liberal democracy. We had the French Revolution and,
The American Revolution.
yeah. Yeah. This is the thinking that undergirds our nation, and we're clinging to it with all our might, even though um, there's very little evidence that it works. Would be great if it did work, wouldn't it?
I mean, I would argue at this stage in history, and especially if you're in the middle class in America, it kind of works.
Why? Tell me more. Like, why does it work for the middle class?
Because they're comfy. Because materially, it's rational
Wow.
for them to believe in these things, and everybody around them believes in these things. So why would you endure the trauma of basically having to live in an intellectual wilderness and ask hard questions like, are the Marxists, are the Trotskyists really right, or the fascists, or like, what even is real?
Mm.
That sucks. So
Mm.
there's a sense in which they are I would argue she is very communal in that sense, that she's living in liberalism, and she's native, not so much just by being indigenous, but by being a PMC liberal.
She's very much an American.
Mm-hmm.
She fits right in. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Even in the way that she doesn't fit in, that's part of how you fit in.
yeah, totally. Right. Like she's demanding recognition, because the way to progress society is for everybody, every individual, to receive recognition.
Especially women and minorities.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, there's this assumption that the one class of people that doesn't need that is the white male because they've already gotten all the recognition. So
Right.
everybody else needs to rise up to that level. And what's always, well, not well, for a long time, has bothered me is why would we want to rise to that level? In other words, is my goal to be kind of like the quintessential, white male idea wise? I mean, is that what I should want? Should I want that? And I guess my answer is no. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that that's not a good enough goal.
Sure. Although to play devil's advocate, it could be argued you already basically have accomplished that. And so on the other side, in a modest way, on the other side, you can be like, yeah, the grass is about as green over here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I think that, you say that this works for people in the middle class, but it works for them only because, not because they're actually like achieving their goal of their stated goal of equality, right?
Sure.
Because that has not happened, but rather it works for them because as members of that class who've already achieved that professional level income and can kind of feel that they're autonomous, it their way of thinking about these political issues does not get in the way of any of their success. That's the way it works. It's a way of kind of having your cake and eating it too. You can feel as though you're striking a blow for equality and for, humanity, while basically continuing to live exactly the same, basically the way that you did before, and kind of try to approach that ideational white male, standard. That's troubling to me, because it's a class of people who have a lot of assets, in their, not just their financial assets, but their intellectual and their habits, in their habits. These are people who have like gotten their act together to the point of being able to get a professional degree or something like that,
Mhm.
and have like dotted their I's and crossed their T's. And that disposition could have been and could be redirected towards a more constructive activity than they've chosen.
Sure. But my argument would be if you're that type of person that can assimilate into professional culture, then why would you be a revolutionary?
Well, but then we have to ask ourselves, why are we angry at these folks? Because clearly we are. I mean, let's face it. I know you might posture and say, no, I'm not angry, but you kind of are. I can tell I'm
Sure.
angry. I mean,
I'm annoyed, but mostly because I was raised by these people, and so that there's a sense in which I kind of am one of these people, and so for me, the main motivation has actually been to try and purge myself of these things to the extent that they're off base. I don't want to say they're like 100% incorrect about everything,
mhm,
but
yeah,
but yeah,
right.
I mean,
Go ahead.
yeah, they're reprobates. I stand by that.
There's better and worse too. I mean, there are folks who spend a great deal of time virtue hoarding or whatever you want to call it. And then there are a lot of other people who do not do that. And that makes them a little bit more tolerable to me, like the people who spend a lot of time either slapping a flag on their pickup truck or, putting, some sort of like left-wing symbol on their t-shirt, are and tweeting a whole lot or Instagramming a whole lot about their wonderful positions are much more annoying than the people who kind of do just have a job and probably kind of know that they got a pretty good deal making their six-figure income and just kind of like live their private lives.
Mhm.
I feel that that's at least a little bit more tolerable.
Although
Um,
I can make the opposite argument and say it's these people who have all this excess of nervous energy that they could be doing something with that.
yeah,
So,
totally. Yeah. Yeah. And what normally happens, they go into therapy or they get into an exercise program or they switch up their diet 20 times and try meditation. I mean, there's all kinds of things that people do when they're not super political that is still like a signal that they've got this excess energy, this not being fulfilled by being a, mid-level manager or whatever, you're doing behind your desk, but that's folks are feeling like the desire to have meaning and purpose, and they always will. And so politics sucks up a lot of that, this endless ping pong match, and then the rest is kind of like self-improvement, constant working on oneself, achieving that absolute optimal psychological condition, physical condition, and stuff like that.
mhm.
Yeah.
Sure. Which is, and that's the ending of the series. It's all kind of been foreplay to talk about therapeutic culture, which is exactly what you're talking about. That
Mm.
seeing yourself as an individual that has to fashion themselves and realize themselves and feel great about themselves. Um,
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't want to like do spoilers, so I don't want to get into it too much, but I hope that you talk a little bit about Lash, or at least like because that whole topic resonates around the culture of narcissism, and all that. So I'm gonna look forward to that. But I don't want to get into that too much because I want to hear what you have to say next week. And I know you're still getting ready for that. But I did want to talk about Matt Christman, which you brought in to the last video you did with a I don't know, it was about a 10-minute section. And Matt Christman, for people who don't know, is he's a Chapo Trap House guy, but he also does some work on his own, and that's from the Kush vlog, correct?
mhm.
Okay,
And
so
there's some
that's
podcasts on, I think it's Stitcher. Like he did a whole history of the American presidency through
yeah,
like the materialist lens. So,
I liked it. Yeah, I liked it as much as I could possibly like American history. So thank you for putting me onto that. So Chrisman, when I first watched him, I had a similar reaction to I had to Slavoj Žižek a while back. You told me, hey, check out what Žižek is doing, and I watched a Žižek video. I'm like, this guy is nuts, man. He is like so not. He does not represent himself well, And I was like, I don't want to listen to him. And I had a similar but not nearly as visceral reaction to Matt Christman when I first listened to him, because he kind of rants. Um, but in both cases, when I ended up actually listening to what they said, they're both worth listening to. So I appreciate that. But yeah, Crispin in particular, I still feel like sometimes like I wish that he would communicate a little bit differently so that he could have a wider audience. But I don't know, like you're kind of an aficionado of Crispin. Like, how do you take his style?
I don't even really think about his style. Or to the extent I do, I mean, I guess it's fine because to me he's just like uh guys I went to school with or whatever. Like he's just a bro and he's just ranting in front of his camera talking about the Civil War and Marxism.
Mhm.
So, but I don't know. I tend to, at an early age, I just learned to abstract people's appearances and the way they communicate the information from the information itself.
Mhm.
Uh, and
Yeah.
and there's thousands of streamers that act more or less like Matt Christman, but they're not talking about the Civil War and material history.
Right. Yeah, he knows a lot. I don't know what his background is. Do you like what his educational background is?
I mean, went to college at least for a bachelor's degree, and then I think he's just kind of been a sort of lumpen failure until Trapo Trap House blew up.
Well, he certainly got on the right train there, I would say. um, but like I've said to you before, Chapo, although I listen to it some, Chapo kind of irritates me a little bit because lots of times when they start out, they spend like 30 or 40 minutes just in banter and jokes before they get to the point. Whereas when Chrisman does his own work, he does jump in pretty darn fast. And, what he says has quite a bit of substance. I feel like, well, maybe his education, but also maybe his self-education has a lot to, it really shows.
And I think he would say as well that, especially when he says similar things that what I'm saying that I've like halfway or more taken from him, is that he can say, I know these people because I'm one of them. I know what it's like to have, well, from his perspective, I don't know specifically about this, but he says, I know what it was like to think that my activism was all Twitter and owning the conservatives as somehow or other, like creating some radical revolutionary future. So that's where that and sort of he kind of came into my awareness because he was coming down off the Bernie failure in 20 and trying to soberly assess why did Bernie do, not only did he not win, why did he do worse than in 2016? And I was going through a similar sort of failure in my sort of anarcho-syndicalist project in my life. And I found that cathartic for someone to be like, well, I tried to do the impossible and I thought some things would work and they didn't. Instead of what a lot of Bernie people do is they complain, oh, the DNC, they rigged it with super electors or this or that, all of which is fine or maybe true, but so what?
Right. Yeah. The truth is, if he had been popular enough and if he had gotten enough support from US progressives, he could have been there.
Or if the party hadn't been split, where a lot of the people that say they would like someone like Bernie, when it comes down to it, they want a Warren, they want a Buttigieg, but his claim is they were trying to mobilize non-voters and swing voters is where the real failure, at least in his calculus, and the whole Chapo, he claims it was all the Chapo guys thought like this, and part of what you're seeing when they take 30 to 40 minutes to get to the point is, again, Chrisman claims they've given up on imagining that this is like political. Fundamentally, this is primarily entertainment, and then it's applied to politics. And he claims they didn't do that before the Bernie loss, but the Bernie loss disillusioned them as to what they were actually doing. And so they're like, let's just be honest.
Wow.
And
I don't feel good about that. I mean, if I in my own small way, like in this channel, if I thought that I were mainly just entertaining people, I would hang it up. There's enough political entertainment going on out there, and it's a higher quality entertainment that I or Chapo could ever do. Although I'm sure they can do better than I can, but like, we don't need more of that. It is a business, I mean, in the case of Chapo anyway, it's a business, I'm sure, but like, I mean, in other words, people have to get paid. But I never wanted to be in the entertainment business. Man, I can understand why he does what he does.
I would argue under capitalist social and economic arrangements, we all kind of are. Even my organic farming, I'm doing luxury art for rich people.
Ooh, yeah, well, a lot of local farmers are, yeah, even what I've noticed is literally a lot of them are just selling like farmy stuff, not food so much as like farmy stuff. Like they'll sell you the jam and the wreaths and
flowers are really common these days.
Yeah, because you can't make a living doing this. And I know that you've had your own, I mean, one of the things I find interesting about you is that you've made an effort to kind of um, live your ideas and kind of try to be consistent. So I want people to know that it's not like you've kind of waved the white flag here, but you found that it's really, really difficult to do that. Um,
In part because I had naive liberal assumptions that if I just made a few right moves and made the argument persuasively as to why I was doing them, all sorts of people would just jump out of bushes
mhm,
and
mhm.
join me. And then something, communism.
Yeah, right. That they would just see reason. And yeah, that is it's such a, gosh, we're stuck in that as a society. In my environmental political thought class, that's like one of my chief objectives is try to disabuse people of the notion that if they just get their information straight and they make a good enough argument, everybody will then, you know, whatever, be green or, put pressure on industries to stop polluting and save the planet. So, the fact that you also kind of thought this, I mean, this is that you could convince people easily of an idea like that. It's really not at all out of line with the way Americans think generally. Um,
Yeah, there's an old quote from Sartre where he got in an argument with an American, like I think it was soon after World War II. And he was basically, the American was talking all this naive, well, you Europeans, you should just get together and get along and whatever. And then Sartre has this line where he says, the difference between us is that I believe in evil and he doesn't. And I think there's this, again, Matt Christman says this better than I'm going to, but once he said it, it totally rang true with all sorts of things I've seen in my life, both in myself and certainly like growing up in Western Kansas surrounded by right liberals. There's this monomaniacal optimism that's usually fueled by religious fervor, but there are atheists variants of it. And that's partly why you can get caught up in these ideas that, well, if I just keep doing this, if I just make one more tweet on Twitter, it's going to start this cascade of positive change, because the
mhm.
alternative is depression and despair.
Yeah, it would seem so. I mean, in the case of some of my students, it's, if I can get this job at an advocacy organization or some sort of NGO or international organization that, deals with climate change issues or ag issues, resource conservation, et cetera, I will be able to be a part of the solution. But you're right. There's this really deep, strange optimism.
Because they
That
believe in progress.
yeah, they believe in progress and they believe in acceleration. Like I'll define that. Like they believe that our science and our rationality can always find a way out of the problems that we cause for ourselves through our science and technology, and that there will be no end to that. We will fix the problems that we cause, and we will even go beyond that, and we're going to create ultimately this utopian world based on reason.
Sure.
There's no
and here's where Christman says you might as well be a Mormon then. Like,
yeah,
if you get your shit together in the afterlife, you're going to have your own planet, and eventually, you'll be a god, and you'll become a bigger and bigger god. It's the same. It's a similar structure of thinking.
it's kind of like a worldly Mormonism.
Mhm.
You and maybe your children even more so are going to climb that ladder of just utopian success. We'll end up colonizing the moon and going to other planets in a spaceship. We'll just be we'll have like agriculture in outer space. you know. Oh, who is it? Isn't it Bezos who wants to like first put industry in outer space? This is a
A
serious
lot of
thing.
these people do. Yeah.
Yeah, like this is actually a serious proposal by a billionaire. Um,
Well,
to
I don't know how serious it is.
well, I mean, he's
He might have
throwing.
meant it seriously.
Oh, he means it serious. That's what I mean. It may not. I don't think it's serious either, but like he seriously means it. That's
Sure.
what William
And what?
Shatner was
Right.
going into space to prove.
And again, if you're that rich, why wouldn't you believe that?
He believes he can do anything and that we can do anything, right? With the technology that we have, including putting all
Or,
of our,
or we'll soon have.
yeah, right. We will have it because he's going, you know, his and corporations like them are going to make it happen. And that is so just, you know, it is. It's so extremely naively, comedically optimistic. And I feel like, you know, we just have to get over this. We're like drunken sailors running around this planet,
Mhm.
you know, acting like fools. And
Well, and this to me, this is the dead end of the dialectic of the Enlightenment. It's we figured out how to do all this tech. We figured out how to become multi-billionaires, at least a few of us. We figured out how to go to the moon.
so it
But
seems
we're
like we
drunken
ought to be able
sailors.
to do anything.
But we can't organize ourselves along non-capitalist lines. That would be insane. That would be tyranny. That's impossible.
Yeah, can't happen. And we
Mm-mm.
can't farm any other way. We can't produce food or anything else any other way than we are now.
Yeah.
Um, we
Yeah.
just can't. We don't have the capability somehow. You know,
And this goes to it is that these people can't imagine uh, an urban farmscape full of backyard gardens and
mhm.
sustainable homes or like ecologically uh, responsible homes, but they can't imagine colonizing Mars.
Right. Man, that says it all, right? I mean, if you did the former, you'd still have to use a lot of technology, a lot of planning, you know, a lot of science would have to go into that. It just would be differently aimed science and technology. It's not like, because I think a lot of people when they hear people talk about stuff like that, oh, we don't want to go back, you know, go back to like something that is retrograde. No, no, like if you did it right, you would definitely be going forward, but you'd be going forward. In other words, you'd be moving forward in technological advancement, but at a different scale for a different purpose.
And controlled by different people.
Yeah. Yeah, which is probably the biggest problem.
Because
Right.
it's possible to imagine the Tesla Mars colony in a way that it's, well, I don't know how hard it is to imagine just a Tesla company town or whatever, but certainly it's easier to imagine both of those than uh, a sort of Jeffersonian vision of smallholders who are content with their lot in life and local democracy.
Yeah, yeah. What you're talking about is kind of the distributism in the modern world, in a way. You know, uh, it is. You know, you're talking about like spreading out um, the ownership and control of property and technology across a lot of people using it at the scale of their own lives, and that can be a very sophisticated system. You know, but it would not be one that was controlled by Jeff Bezos or whoever runs Tesla. What's
Sure.
his name?
Which is Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that's the rub. I mean, this is part of like Christman's argument about post Civil War Reconstruction in the South is that it's not primarily there's the common like left liberal way of viewing it is, oh look, still white supremacy keeping the black man down, and that's like in play. But what it misses is, well, suppose they had redistributed the plantation land to these newly freed slaves. Um, well, what happens if they don't want to compete with each other to produce as much food as possible so they can ship the food north or to the rest of the world? What happens if you don't have basically a pliant population of proletariats? Well,
mm-hmm.
then the whole political economy of America would have been changed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Scary.
And
Scary.
and that's scarier than complaining about white supremacy alive today in the Republicans.
Yeah, it seems to be inconceivable. And I think your earlier point about, it's easier to think of colonizing Mars than doing something like that is very well taken. There's no reason why we couldn't do something like that, except for we don't have the will to do it. Um, and we haven't taken any sort of collective measures to get us to the point where we have that will. Um, and it's hard to know exactly what to do at this point, other than kind of what you're doing, which is you're going to try to make your own environs kind of, the way you think things should be. But as far as like impacting the larger system at this point, it's like, I know you and I both kind of go through quite a bit of our lives are, I don't want to say despair, but just sort of like realizing how very difficult any change from that direction would be, especially when we think about the environment. I was reading a few days ago about like soil depletion, and this isn't the first time I've read this and really contemplated it. Supposedly, we have about 60 years left of soil fertility in a lot of the arable land in the world. We're losing it quickly, and there's real concern for whether we'll be able to feed this giant population we now have on the planet. So before we get to like catastrophic climate change, we could be hitting a problem of not being able to feed ourselves just because of that. And in other words, we're facing a situation sooner rather than later, probably, where if we don't change the way that we live fairly drastically, we will have a mass starvation situation, or, a series of climatic catastrophes that kill a lot of people. And we're looking at that now. I mean, it's becoming clearer and clearer, and we're still not really changing anything. We've got international protocols and agreements. They're not being followed. So, people can tweet all they want about how we need to have those, protocols in place, and politicians need to do something about it, but it's not happening. So anyway, I don't know, like, I went down kind of a dark path there, but I mean, it really is. I mean, the reason why this topic of liberalism is so important is because unless we can get out of this groove and stop being beautiful boaters and brunchers, I mean, seriously, we're screwed. I think we both agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the problem is, what do you do when you live in a privileged, cosseted existence of boats and brunch? So that all this other stuff is abstract and hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
And acting, I've concluded, like, in the last year, that a big part of the problem seems to be that people, I don't know if it's people in general or people that have been brainwashed by liberalism, is that it's incredibly hard to be proactive, and it's really easy to be reactive, because to be proactive, you have to like figure out what's actually happening, figure out, do you agree with that, or do you want something else to be happening? And then if you want something else to be happening, then how do you organize your life to hopefully make this future hypothetical reality real in the present someday? And then pretty quickly you'll realize, oh, I have to do it with other people because I'm a very small creature.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is very hard. Whereas to be reactive, you just have to take whatever part of reality comes at you at face value and then just react to that. in a way. So in the one case, you have to do all this work to actually be, I would argue, a liberal subject, an actual individual who's correctly assessing the situation and acting freely. And in the other one, you can just be a victim of fate and assert yourself. If you assert yourself at all, you assert yourself in response to this thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. And usually through just voicing how you feel and what you think, because you can't do a whole lot.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right that, was it Camus who said hell is other people?
I think that was Sartre.
Sartre. Okay. Well, Sartre was right, in the sense that, it's one thing to think these thoughts. It's another thing to try to bring other people in, and everybody is very stuck, it seems, in their groove. And so, getting any level of like cooperation is extremely difficult. It's the biggest challenge is how to organize people. Hence my frustration with churches. That's probably another day, but I have long thought that churches represent one of the few organizations of substance in our society that are still somewhat intact and represent people organizing themselves without the aid of government. But what they generally do is very little, other than Sunday services and a few, charitable enterprises and discussion groups. But here they are, as like a source of organization potential. And they're, it's frustrating to me. Let's put it that way. That's why I've harped about that on the channel a bit.
Yeah, but I guess it seems to me, is it frustrating to you because the liberal part of you that wants them to organize some sort of utopia is frustrated in the face of basically their cynicism about the human condition and what they're actually capable of, which is just administering the sacraments and preaching the word and then writing off the future and as in God's hands?
So is it liberal to hope that churches will get their act together and be more communal?
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, if you're saying I'm thinking like a liberal because I'm hoping that people will see reason, yeah, I get your point. The goal of churches forming communities more would not be liberal, though. The communities themselves, I mean, any sort of community that kind of forms at a lower level kind of organically is not forming on a liberal basis, I think.
Yeah, I meant more, are you taking for granted a kind of liberal anthropology that individuals can just form communities of mutual benefit?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't even necessarily, I'm using this loosely. I don't want to claim that somehow or other liberals have a monopoly on forming communities. I guess I was just trying to ask a provocative question.
Yeah, well, I guess you kind of did. I don't know. I mean, we might be collapsing communalism and like libertarianism, which Christian anarchists sometimes do. I think that might be, there's a point where they kind of meet up, a little bit. Libertarians and Christian anarchists.
Because libertarians are anarchists.
Yeah. Which reminds me, I need to put in a plug for my my seminar this summer is going to be on Christian anarchism. So if people are interested in that, they should be looking for some info about that soon. I know one thing I wanted to talk about for sure before we go is your advertisement for Rage Baking cookbook and why we got this sponsorship. I mean, as you put it, political philosophy HQ does need to keep the lights on, but like rage baking, I didn't make this deal, so you need to tell me how this went down.
No, I just found it when I was looking up, when I was doing research for this discussion. I have that and another Farming While Black book that I was maybe going to touch on. Yeah, it's just funny. And it's the distillation of everything I'm saying, that you're frustrated with Trump being president. Well, baking is feminine praxis or feminist.
I definitely got the point. If I saw that book in the bookstore, I would be like, oh my God.
Sure.
Wow. So it kind of symbolizes these, I don't know, it almost like the triviality of the mentality. You know, when you get to the point where you in any way think that baking can be a political act. And I don't think that that book is supposed to be a joke or some form of like sarcastic irony. Could I be
No,
wrong?
no, I don't think so. And there's a whole, it doesn't seem to be that way. I mean, maybe certain of the authors think that, like internally, maybe they have contempt for their audience for this, but no, it seems pretty straight on. And there's a whole controversy of how it's not sufficiently inclusive of Black women. So there's been a whole feud, and I think they had to issue a second edition that was more inclusive and diverse.
Oh boy.
So the reception of it has also not been all that ironic. Which
Well,
again goes to somewhat what I'm, what's the problem with the world? Well, rage baking isn't diverse and inclusive enough. I think there was also a sort of plagiarisms allegation that Black women were rage baking before, and now it's another case of white women appropriating their culture.
all right. I mean, there might be some truth to that. There might
There
be.
is with a lot of this, and it's what my annoyance with these people and these outlooks is they can't see that no matter how justified they are at any given point, they're circling the drain.
Yes, yes. And I mean, more than anything else, I mean, even if we can't really accomplish a whole lot other than preventing people from circling the drain, that itself would be an accomplishment. So, I mean, you know, hopefully, we'll get some folks to think about that, about how they spend their time. I mean, that's kind of my hope.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm not really happy about this, and it may be true that hell is other people, but if there is a heaven, it's going to be other people too.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can all agree we need other people, or we would be miserable without them.
And dead.
Yeah, and dead. But at the same time, we're very likely to be miserable and or dead with them. And
Sure.
the way things are right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.